Hey guys, welcome. So today we're going to talk about being offended and people being so offensive, right? This is such a fun topic to dive into. I think especially for Elle and I being on social media, it's such an interesting observation to see how people take things personally. So we're going to dig into that today. But before we do, we want to tell you guys, make sure that you know about two of our favorite companies in the entire paleo space, and that's Primal Kitchen. Guys, Primal Kitchen's offering you guys a discount, which is freaking awesome. So you guys can get 10% off Primal Kitchen products with the code KICKASSLIFE. So we'll put a link in the show notes to that. And also Rep Provisions. We've talked to you guys about them, but please support regenerative agriculture. I love Rep Provisions so much. They have anything from meat products. They also have high quality pork to convenience items like beef sticks and pecan nut butters and even beef broth popsicles that are flavored like fruit that are amazing. So make sure you guys check them out and also use our discount code KICKASSLIFE if you want 10% off from them as well. All right. You ready to dig in, Elle?
Yeah. No, I love this topic because I've got a lot of really great examples in real life of the conundrum of how someone could be offended by something, but someone else isn't. And it's just such a strange thing. I also feel, I love Dr. Wayne Dyer used to talk about this, about stop looking for reasons to be offended, because the same energy that's coming at you, you know what I mean? Now, someone could be offensive, right? Like there's differences. Like I could be like, Tara, you're a terrible, awful jerk, like nasty. And that's like, okay, that person's being offensive. Or you could just have a viewpoint that I'm offended by. So it's could be indirect. But either way, I think it's an important exercise to look at ways that we can be less offended, because that is just ego. And also it's dropping our vibration, man.
Totally. And I'm such a recovering defensive person. My dad used to tell me this all the time, like, Tara, you are so defensive. And I'm like, you're so offensive, like that's the perfect thing to say when you're being defensive and being offended, is you're just being offensive. Like it's total blame. And I realized what was at the root of that is I really cared what my dad thought. And I didn't want to admit that, but I really cared what he thought. I thought my dad was so smart and I wanted him to see how smart I was. And so if he said anything that bugged me and I wanted to, get my point across to him and he wasn't getting it, then now I'm super mad. I need him to know how perfect I am and how smart I am and all of that. And so like, man, I've gone through it's fascinating to watch. I think anybody who's on a personal development journey, it's fascinating to watch your reactions evolve over time to things, because now I would say, I feel like I'm a pretty low reactive, I'm pretty low on my reactions to things, but that has come through confidence in myself, because now it's like, there's just that whole different dynamic. Instead of my dad saying something and I'm like, oh my gosh, no, let me teach him. I need to teach him. He is wrong here. And I need to show him how right I am. It's more this quiet moment inside my soul where I'm like, oh, I see where he's at. Right. And it comes from this place of confidence maybe it's not good discretion. Maybe I see that he's coming from a place of pain on that. And that's why he's saying that. I don't need to hammer him down and prove him wrong. It's like, I have that self-confidence within myself that I can say, oh, I see where they're at. And that's, I think, where we're going to try to get to through the course of this podcast today, is like, how do we go from, I need to hammer it down and show them they're wrong, to compassion and noted and seeing where they're at, right?
And I really like this Mark Twain quote I heard one time about forgiveness, because that's kind of what that is in that moment. You're like, okay, I see where he's at. You're forgiving the infraction or the thing you might have been offended by 5 years ago, and you're putting understanding and compassion on it. But this quote was something like, gosh, I have it here because it was so good. Oh yeah. Forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. It's good stuff.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I have so many examples of this, and I want to give some concrete ones. We have the general ones, like someone getting offended by political stuff or whatever. So I'll give a couple examples. I've been writing sketch comedy and comedy for years, and I used to perform it all the time. So I've done over like 150 live shows. There's a gay guy in my group who was a co-comedy writer, and he wrote a sketch that was joking around about, like, I think it's kind of common knowledge that gay men at least are very open with each. They don't get offended. It's like, hey, you wanna hook up later, or hey, can I have your phone number? And it's no one gets offended by this kind of direct communication. It's kind of amazing. And anyway, so he wrote a sketch because some of his straight friends were amazed at like how easy like they can't just walk up to girls and be like, hey, can I have your number? When no gay guy would be offended maybe by that. So he wrote a sketch about it where he brings a guy to like a gay bar, just go, here, let me show you. Anyway, the sketch was pretty funny. I didn't find it offensive, but my straight friend, who was a female, who was in the audience afterwards, said, I think that sketch was really offensive towards gay people. And I said, well, then maybe you should go backstage and talk to the gay guy who wrote it. Who's right? No one's right or wrong here, but very interesting, right? Now, the same could go for any group of people. There could be a black person that thinks something's offensive when another doesn't, right? So we all have our own interpretations. But I just think it's really interesting when that happens. I had another friend as well at this comedy theater named Matt, and he had once wanted to be a priest. And he went through the whole process of it and realized, okay, at the end of the day, he didn't want to be a priest. He just loves Jesus, loves his religion, and he loves talking about it. He loves the discussion. So he still goes to church every Sunday. He's very, very religious, and he loves talking to his pastor, and they love getting into all these like theological discussions. Yeah. And so he had a bunch of Jesus t-shirts that he would wear, and they were like pretty funny, like jokey Jesus t-shirts or whatever. One of them had like Jesus popping up behind a couch, and it was like, oh my God, he was behind the couch the whole time, or just kind of goofy stuff. And so we always used to joke around about it. And one time at our theater, he said, I have a really great idea for a Jesus t-shirt. And the idea was that it was Jesus nailed on the cross on the t-shirt, and the caption was, nailed it. Okay, now, wow. Because this is a very religious guy who loves Jesus and respects him. Yet, when I was telling someone this, I was actually talking to someone, it was like a online dating thing. This was years ago, and I don't know how we got into discussion on the phone, but I mentioned this story. And he was so offended. He was like, oh my God, I don't know what Jesus would say about that. And my response was like, you know what? I don't know. In my studying of Jesus, I think Jesus would laugh his motherfucking ass off, because that's the kind of player he is. I really do believe that he would laugh. But you know what I mean? Like, here's this guy who goes to church every Sunday, is super religious, and yet this other guy who actually isn't as into his religion is so offended by this. It's just very fascinating to me. And I think that comes in like not being able to take a joke. It's a joke. And, being a comedian, it's tough for me to be offended easily, because I have a sick sense of humor too. And I realize that there's context. George Carlin is one of my favorite comedians. He's dead now. But he used to always say, hey, you can joke about anything. It's the context. It's the way in which you say a thing, right? And that can be the determining factor between whether I'm offended by something you said, the way that you said it, or was it what you said. Because if something's in a patronizing tone, someone might take offense to it, and if not, the other. So I just think these are really important things to look at, and I thought those two situations were very interesting, because I was like, I don't see, but I get it. I'm not personally offended. And it's interesting that someone would take on the offense of a group they're not a part of, too.
That's what I was thinking when you were saying this. I'm like, this is such an interesting concept. Why do we take offense on behalf of someone else? Right? Like, well, I'm not Jewish or I'm not Native American, but that I would be so offended. And it's like, I don't know, like maybe the Native American person hears that and they like chuckle to themselves because they can take a joke, or I don't know, maybe somebody's making a joke on, I've had people make jokes about blondes and I'm like, okay, that's pretty funny, and I just laugh like, but maybe, why is my friend who's a brunette be like, oh my gosh, that's so offensive. And it's like, this is actually a pattern that's really worth looking at in ourselves, because what it signifies is that you're taking things on that aren't your own. You are taking things on that aren't your own. And we can get lost in that crap. Right? Like, okay, Black Lives Matter is a great example of this. Like, I got messages. I was totally in support of, when I saw what happened, of course, I'm talking to my kids about it. I'm teaching them. We're, just appalled. I'm like angry. I went through all the emotions, and I'm getting messages like, why aren't you using your platform to support this more and stuff like that? And I'm like, dude, I honestly, like, this is really fascinating that I was fascinated. Someone's
offended by your lack of engagement.
Yeah. And I was like, I just am going intuitively off what feels right for me. Like, when something comes up, I post it. I'm not going to be like, okay, because so-and-so wants me to do this, now I have to start acting that way. And I think that's honestly a lot of this taking on offense in behalf of other people is social programming. right? Like
And
you are
it
not
begets
allowed
more
to
of
do
it.
that.
So if you got to train yourself out of it because you are going to find more and more reasons and you're going to be heightened to that. Now, one of the biggest examples we see are the people that are always like ready to jump on a Twitter thing and be like, oh, that's BS or da 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 da. I mean, those are people that are offended easily and looking for reasons to be offended. I
We actually do this, Elle. We actually do this I'm listening right now to Joe Dispenza's Breaking the Habit of Being
One of my
Yourself.
favorite books. Everyone should read that. It's so good.
It's so good. And he's talking about how, like, when we are at a total peace state, when we're in complete peace, it's boring, right? So we are always looking for something to entertain ourselves with. And I think a lot of people have found a very easy, low level, easy way to entertain your mind is to find things to be offended by, right? But what if you could let that go? What if you could stop trolling Facebook for, because I know people do this. I know, like, my ex-husband like openly admits it. He's like, yeah, I like it. I do it for sport. It's fun. He's just scrolling through Facebook looking for somebody to like fight with, to entertain himself with. But what if you could stop doing that? Like, what else would you fill that hole with? Now you're bored. You're not looking for any triggers. You're not looking for anyone to offend you. Uh-oh, now what? Maybe you're going to start creating the life of your dreams. Maybe you're going to start filling that with positive things that actually bring more abundance into your life instead of just this emotional roller coaster that leads to nowhere. It leads to nowhere, right? So there's an entertainment factor, and it can be addicting. It
Yeah,
really
it's like
can.
water cooler gossip talk or gossiping or things like that. It's so interesting. So we have we have a rough political landscape right now in the US. And, politics, religion, sexuality, those are the top ones that people are up in arms about. And it's interesting because I am looking at it from a different perspective and I find a lot of humor in it, even though it might be dark humor, where someone else I talk to is like enraged, can't handle it. They are like so angry, their stress levels, you just feel the cortisol. And I'm like, why can't you just stand a step back and see it in a bigger, different picture? And it's just kind of interesting, the society we're in now, because I feel like, especially with comedy too, it's like, oh my God, some comedian will come out and it's like, that's too soon, that's not wrong. And I'm a big fan of too soon. I don't feel like when it comes to jokes, I'm open. And a lot of people aren't. They find so much offense. They take so much offense to that. I had one time I was driving out of a supermarket and some crazy homeless guy, like you could just tell, it was just, the guy was mentally not right. And he just like, I was just driving and I'm like waiting to pull out and the guy yelled bitch really loud at me. And I remember being like kind of shaken and internalized it. And I'm like, and then I thought, what do I, like, he's crazy.
Right.
He's crazy.
Right. And you're going to get all emotional.
Why am I suddenly feeling so offended? He's crazy. Now, why wouldn't, so that's someone you go, oh, well, I don't care what their opinion is, so it's different if someone else were to say it. But you know what? If you called me the same thing, I might be hurt by it, and I certainly might have a feeling of being offended. But at the end of the day, the work is to try to get out of that feeling as soon as you can. You know what I mean?
To marvel at it. Like if I was like, oh, you're a bitch, like I think your processing, at least for me, my processing would be like, first I'd be like, whoa, like, okay, hold on. What's going on with her? And is there any truth in that? Let me think this through for a second. Let me allow the doors to open. Am I being a bit, or, and then I'd be like, oh, wow, I kind of am. And then there could be some growth. Or if I'm like, no, for real, I'm not. I'm like, hey, maybe she's going through some hormone stuff. And like, you can let it roll instead of just like, I can't believe I'm never doing this with you again. It's just like, let's marvel at the situation instead of emotionally reacting to the situation. That you reminded me, Elle, I have to tell this story. I love Austin, Texas so much. Like Austin is I left my heart in Austin. If my kid's dad didn't live in Utah, like I would be definitely living in Austin, Texas right now. I love it so much. And I'm like, here I am. I always talk about how much I love Austin. And it's this like, beautiful convergence of Southern old school with new age hippie and health minded and all this. Okay, I'm going for a run and I'm running across the bridge over Lady Bird Lake. And I'm like, I've got my sports bra, my shorts on, and everybody's all active out there. And this old man from across the bridge yells, "Did you forget your shirt, you whore?"
I love it.
It took me so off. This is the best part, Elle. I was like, no. I answered it. I said no. And
no.
Then I turned around and I looked at, there was a guy behind me and he just like shrugs his shoulders like, Like, I have no idea. That was so weird. And it is
And
one of
that
those
guy is sitting
moments.
on that bench waiting and looking, and that's his daily deal.
Exactly. He's doing it for fun, probably. He is doing it for fun. It's entertainment for him, you know? And so that's where it comes into boundaries, basically emotional boundaries for myself. Am I going to choose to be like, wow, maybe I shouldn't run in a sports bra when it's 90 something degrees outside and humid also. Maybe wow, am I, I could choose to go there, or I could just choose to be like, yeah, I mean, this is probably a homeless man. He kind of looked like it. He probably might have some emotional issues, and that's where our emotional boundaries come into play. It's just like social media, right? Like I actually love social media for so many reasons because it's such an opportunity for growth. So when I see somebody that has a totally different opinion. Like, let's say, for example, I'm not political. I don't really have strong opinions about politics at all. I like to just kind of sit back and marvel at things.
And I'm offended by that. I'm just
I feel like I just feel like I don't have enough information to have an opinion. I'm like, dude, if I actually knew Trump and I knew people who were high up in DC, then I might have some opinions. I don't, and I'm just like going off stuff that's coming on TV. I just don't feel like I have enough information to really have a strong opinion here. But for example, somebody that I'm friends with, like, he was posting all this stuff. He's a super Trump supporter. And I was like, okay. Like, noted. It was more like noted.
Mental note to self.
Great. That's how he is. Okay. And like that person hates Trump, like noted, instead of, oh my gosh, can you believe he supports Trump? Oh my God. Okay. Like, who cares? What's it to you? Just noted, I think,
noted,
is a good.
and it might inform a decision either way. It doesn't matter what political party. It might inform a decision on what you think of that person's character or their beliefs or whatever, and whether they're aligned with yours. That's all. It's just like, okay,
Just
noted. I'm
information.
probably not going to get along with this person on certain levels, and that's okay.
Right.
I don't need to defend it or be offended by it or comment on any of this stuff. And it's interesting. I'm going to admit, I got offended. I was a little bit offended by Salt Lake City, by your state. So when I was there, I was shocked that I think part of me. So this is interesting. The laws about, I'm not a drinker, but you guys have all of these crazy things about drinking. You can't go to a bar and just sit down and get drinks. You have to order food. It's this whole dance, and it's kind of like I've learned it's a little underhanded. Like they'll be like, are you going to order food? Like it's a game we're playing. It's like when I used to work at a head shop and sell bongs and stuff, and a cop would come in and they'd be like, oh, that's a great bong. And we would be like, it's a water pipe. It's like, okay.
Right.
Jesus, right? Oh my God,
Right.
we're on the same thing. So I remember being there, and even though I'm not a drinker, I felt like, how dare a religion take over a state? How dare? This is so infringing on my, like, I still don't believe in blue laws and things like that in certain states where, like, you can't buy alcohol on Sunday. I'm like, oh my God. Like, because to me, that's religion imposed on the state, in which I do believe in separation. Now, here's the interesting. So, I mean, I was not like personally, but I did have a minute of like, what the hell? Like, this is so, I felt like my freedoms were limited, right?
Yeah.
Yet someone in Utah, maybe even yourself, might be offended by the idea of having to wear a mask.
Right.
And feeling like, so like someone I read the other day, someone was like, when a business says no shirt, no shoes, no service, nobody is up in arms about like, you're violating my right to walk around barefoot. But when someone's like, hey, don't come in the store without wearing a mask, you got all these quote Karens, that whole conundrum of that whole theme being like, hey, so it's interesting. I think sometimes it's good to see where are you contradicting yourself maybe on the things you're offended by. We are often hypocritical about some of these things. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And that's just like a simple one, like I wasn't like personally, but if I was a drinker, actually, I would have been so offended by Salt Lake City because I'd be like, what the hell? Why are you dictating when I can drink? Everywhere else in the country, no one can do this. And then I got to a higher level of like, how did a whole state get, and then here I am like in some, theoretical, it just, and so I had to just get over myself real quick. But whatever, that's the way it is here. It's just the way it is.
I think you hit on something so huge there. And I think that's when we get offended, there's something inside of us that feels like our rights or our freedom are being taken away, that we can't express ourselves, and I think that's why even in commentary where somebody's like, hey, Tara, Trump is the best president ever, let's say I was a huge anti-Trump person. If I reacted to that, I'd be like, ooh, for something in me feels like their opinion is going to take away my right to have my opinion.
Right.
Right. And so for you, that experience exemplifies to me that you're like, well, hold on. I feel very strongly that I have freedom to choose for myself. And you're now taking that from me. That's where I feel like this offensive thing
But
comes.
the truth is that I have a choice. Do I want to live in Salt Lake or be there or not? Do you want to be around
right.
this person or not? Do you want to subject yourself to this information or not? So when someone's offended by your Instagram profile or mine or whatever, don't freaking pay attention to me then.
Right. It's starting to it's navigating the situation, right? Like I heard the most amazing 3-hour long talk from this woman who was a Holocaust survivor in a concentration camp and talked about how her mom completely thrived in that situation where all of her freedoms were taken away, but not really, because she mentally chose strength on the inside. It's like, okay, how do I navigate this situation in a way that brings me personal empowerment and truth? So she became like this little leader inside of this concentration camp where she was like, no, this is how we show up here. This is how we do this. Right. And so even in those situations, and I'd say, that is a trigger for me too, when I'm like, I feel like my freedoms are being stomped on or taken away. I'm like, like you don't get to, right?
Yeah.
That is definitely an area that gets to me, but it's like, okay, hold on a second. How do I navigate this situation that I find myself in the way that makes the most sense to bring the most peace to my life, right? Like, for example, the mask thing, for sure. I fully admit, like, I'm not on board with that game. But when I walk into my gym, is there a person making probably barely over minimum wage that requires me? This is how it works in my gym. You have to wear a mask when you walk in. And then once you walk past the station, then you're done. Then you don't have to wear it anymore.
Which
and
makes no sense whatsoever.
Makes no sense. There's no one at the front desk except the person who's behind a shield. And then, once you get around other humans, you don't have to wear it. So to me, it's like, okay, yes, this definitely doesn't make sense. So at first, I was bugged by it. I'm like, oh my, I'm muttering stuff. I'm pulling it off my face. I'm like, it's so freaking stupid. Are you kidding me? Like,
Totally.
And eventually I was just like, you know what? Okay, what are you going to do? Are you going to go talk to the governor or, are you going to make an action here?
That's the other thing, right? I want to, okay, so that's the pinpoint. If you're not ready to take action about something, so let's say you're so offended by people texting and driving or whatever, right? You could be up in arms, shoot them looks, give them the middle finger, but are you going to be calling your congressman? Are you doing something about it to change it? You might want to take a look at that, and if not, settle down.
Exactly. So I was like, you know what? This is not my battle. I'm not doing anything about it. So just get over it. So just wear your freaking mask, walk in, and now I have peace again, right? So,
someone was offended by, well, I just think that so someone was offended by the title of my book, Confident as Fuck. A couple people were. Some people were like, I can't interview you about that book because my audience. I had someone email me. This was a great one. This was like my favorite one. I had someone email me when it first came out, and they just said, I think the title of your book is sexualizing our youth. We have enough of that. I can't believe you used that word. It's really, and then they said, you should look into Masaru Emoto's work on water and how vibration affects da-da-da-da and words matter and all this kind of stuff. And here's the funny part, Tara. I actually quote Masaru's Japanese study on water in my book, but they clearly didn't read it, so they totally judged a book by its cover. And it was great because normally I wouldn't respond to that, but I responded back and I said, first of all, it's funny you mentioned that guy because I talk about it in my book. So you just judged a book by its cover. Clearly, you haven't read it, number one. Number two, it's just a word. I said, I think it says more about you and that your need to chastise me over a book you haven't read based on a word says more about you than it says about me.
Well, and for my impression of the title of your book was that it was very strategic and had a very powerful message. And that was, I'm not afraid to say this. Like that, it's sending the message of confidence to the point that I choose how I speak in the face of everyone else saying, you're not allowed to say that. I choose this, right? And especially coming from a woman, I found that a very intelligent book title. So that was my impression of it. But let's talk about cussing.
Someone else is offended. Yeah.
Right. Because I grew up not cussing, right? Like ever. Because I was Mormon, right? Like, and here's the thing that I've learned about it is that when someone would cuss, because I had this little moment of being offended that would come in, I missed what they were saying. that little moment of being offended by this word,
Good one.
it's like everything else went blind. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they just said the F word. Like, ugh, like, I don't like it when they say the F word. Maybe I should talk to them about how, the fact I don't like them when they say the F word. And I'm not even listening anymore. I missed it because I was offended by that. Right. So being offended also, it completely cuts off connection, because you can't actually like get past that little moment of offense and say like, where is this person really at? If for me, like one thing I was thinking about in preparation for this was our kids and like bullying, and we teach kids not to be offensive. Like, don't ever say someone's fat. Oh my gosh. Like, don't ever say the color of someone's skin. Like, don't say they have a big nose. Like, don't be offensive. Oh my gosh, don't be offensive. But we don't teach our kids how to handle it when someone is quote unquote offensive to them. And this is a huge disservice.
Yep.
When every once in a while they'll come home with a victim story of somebody said this about me, like, because I'm not Mormon and we live in a very Mormon state, right? Or somebody said this about something. And my immediate response as a mom is, how do I help them navigate a situation like this? I'm like, so what do you think was going on with them that they would say something like that? Where do you think they're coming from? Well, okay, they're Mormon, and like that's how they see, like, yeah, like that's how their parents taught them, and like that's where they're coming from. But it's that resiliency that comes when you can, instead of being offended, you can step into the shoes of the other person and say like, where were they coming from there? Now all of a sudden you don't have to feel threatened by it. It's really truly about them. And this brings me to another point I really wanted to make is like, if you find yourself being offended, every time I find myself being offended or hurt is a code word for offended. So you feel hurt by someone, the mantra I repeat over and over is, don't take anything personally. Nothing others do is because of you, from Juan Miguel Ruiz in the Four Agreements. And I mean, this has helped me through breakups. This has helped me through family relationships, kids saying stuff, nothing others do is because of you. And at first I didn't like that. Mantra, because I was like, no, this is taking away personal responsibility. Like I did do that. Like it is my fault. It is about me. And it's like, if you can just push through that and accept that nothing others do is because of you, this is when you can start to marvel at things. Like maybe your boss called you lazy. Maybe your boss was like, you're being lazy. You're not doing anything I say. Now, if you go into nothing others do is because of you, it's not that you're removing personal responsibility and saying like, oh, like he just thinks I'm lazy and I don't have to change anything. No, but there is this little finesse moment of like, why did he say such a strong word like call me lazy? What's going on with him? Oh, maybe it's freaking COVID and he's scared to death that he's going to lose his business. And like, we just had to furlough 12 people and he's stressed out. So maybe instead of being offended and coming at him with all this anger, I can go into a moment of peace and say like, okay, he needs some compassion right now. And how can I show up differently? Right. So instead of it removing personal responsibility, actually, in my opinion, can increase personal responsibility, because you're able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and come at it a place of like, okay, how can I help here? How can I help this situation, instead of just fighting?
And if that boss had been, so what that is too, is it's really being offended by a word versus the concept. And you have to take a minute to think about the concept.
Right.
Like, okay, lazy. He could have said, hey, you know what? I really need people to be all in and work way harder, I think, and more attentive and focused than they are now. Like, I'd like you to be. That might have landed better. Okay. Right. But still, if the word was used, you're offended by the word lazy. It could trigger something. Maybe your parents always called you a lazy brat growing up. Whatever it is, right? It goes back to the trigger episode. But in that moment, you can go, well, what does lazy mean? Forget the charge of it. And is there any truth to that? Right? Like, and also too, taking the other, it's funny about words. So the C word, because I can't even say it, right?
Yeah.
C word.
Gotcha. 4-letter C word.
So when it's so bad, you can't even say the word, like N word, C word. Okay. So the C word is not appropriate technically in our, like, that's something people are like, oh my God, that is
not
so
in the
harsh.
US anyway.
In the US. But they throw that word around in Australia like it's nobody's business. They put it on posters and shit. These people call each other C words every 5 seconds. He
Totally.
has no. So here's the other thing too. So back in San Francisco when I used to work, then goes back to ethnocentrism and judging other people's cultures, because honestly we can get offended by that. So I used to get offended because years ago when I lived in San Francisco 20 years ago, huge Asian population, a lot of them, very like didn't speak English, straight off the boat in a way, and you'd be at the market and you would be like in front of the green beans at the store, and an old Asian man or woman would just literally physically push you aside and just start digging in the green beans. And you look at them like, that is so rude. And they look at you like, what? Because in their culture, it's not rude.
Right.
Because in their culture, it isn't. That doesn't mean I like it. Doesn't mean I have to do business with these people. But that's how. So here I am, so offended. How rude are you to do that? How dare you put? I had one guy. I was sitting on the train in San Francisco, and I would have given up my seat. Absolutely given up my seat for an elderly person. This old Asian guy, just comes up to me, literally, just takes me out of my seat and sits down. I was like, what the fuck? I was like, how dare you? I was like so incensed. But again, like in their culture, nobody blinks an eye at that. Nobody blinks an eye at that. Now, so sometimes it's interesting. We have to look at other cultures. There's certain cultures that don't have the same type of business ethics that we do. For example, like in the U.S., we take breach of contract seriously. Like if you sign a contract and you don't go with it, we look at that like bad business. You would get a bad reputation if you keep bailing on all your promises. But in other cultures, that's not the case. If they find something better, they'll run to it and ditch you. And so you're sitting there being constantly offended by this happening all the time, but it's a cultural thing. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it. Doesn't mean you have to like it. But it's something to think about, because that's ethnocentricity. That's where we, again, are judging another's culture. To them, it's not rude. To them, it's not lame. That's just how they do it. And that is why sometimes there are conflicts with, getting together with people of other cultures, because they have a different foundation. It's not a part of their society. And so we're judging it from our lens.
Right. I love this topic. My ex-husband was Samoan, half Samoan. His dad was from Samoa, and so there were certain traits that his dad had that we just thought it was just him. Like he's just like, and then we would, be around all his brothers and family. It's like, oh, like culturally, this is how it rolls. Got it. And you're so right. I took a really high level nutrition course from a guy one time, and he kept using the C word. And I was so offended. I was like, this guy is like this misogynistic, like a-hole, like he has no respect for women, like, oh my gosh. And then, and then I learned, I just didn't know. I had never been exposed to that before. So it's like the joke is on us. How funny is it that just because of our own ignorance, we're sitting there being offended when it's completely on us, and I think we've all had that. I love this point about cultural things. I'd say, if you're like in an intercultural marriage, maybe perhaps like go to their home country. I bet you will like have so much compassion, so much understanding. It's kind of like when you're dating someone or married to someone and you meet their home family. You're like, oh, that's why I get it. Like, this is how it rolls in your family. Like, got it. So I think having some context can really decrease the amount of offense that we take to the things that other people do.
Yeah. Love and on the different, so I have a friend who moved to Australia, and while being there, they're just like, oh my God, what's this? Like how, they're like, not finding reason to be offended, but there's some things that have like hit them in the wrong way. One was they sent me a sign from like a hiking trail. So Australia is very let's protect you. We want to help you. Which seems great. But so the sign before the hike was like, here are the rules. And one of them was like, we will give you a two-way radio. Time this. We will give you a bottle of water. Make sure we're going to. And my friend was like, what is this babysitting? It's like a nanny. She was like, this is like a nanny society, right? Like that would never fly. If I saw that, I was like, where's the personal responsibility there, right? Like you're on a hike, you're on your own. Good luck.
Right.
I mean, I don't know that I feel it would be our government's responsibility to provide you with water, a two-way radio, a freaking map. It's like, don't go out in the freaking woods then if you're not prepared. I mean, that's just like how I feel about it. But their culture is totally different. They're kind of coddled and nannied that way. But from an outsider's perspective, my friend from the U.S., she's just like, what is going on? This is taking away personal responsibility. And she had to find reasons. She had to just like go, wow, I'm getting like personally offended by the way
Right.
Australia as a society is handling like their message. But you know what? That's their society. There's certain things that are acceptable places than elsewhere. And so I think also too, I think as a culture, we've kind of glamorized this emotional state of being offended to some degree because people get a lot of attention for it.
Totally.
And
it kind of makes you smart in a way. It's like, I'm smart because I know that that's like so inappropriate to say something like that. Like, oh my gosh, like I'm so politically aware. I'm so cultured. I'm so educated. So it's almost like this weird status move to be offended by that. Like, can you believe that she said that? I'm so emotionally evolved. Like I have such good social skills that like, can you believe she would say like something like that in front of so-and-so, right? It's like this weird intellectual play, but really it just makes you look small. Like, I don't know anybody who I respect and admire that talks like that, that finds judgment in other people and sits there and is offended by what they say. It reflects a certain amount of insecurity. You know, I just interviewed Rob Wolf. I love him. I respect him so much. I don't see Rob being like, can you believe like what Elle said on a podcast? He would it's just not in his psyche. It's not how he's got so much going for himself, you know, and that's kind of how
Rob's a very confident, direct communicator who is really good with who he is. He exudes a lot of confidence, and he and Mark Sisson are very similar that way. They're very straight shooters. They're confident, and they are really not easily offended or don't find reasons to be offended often. And it's very rare that I can't not imagine Rob getting rattled. You know, actually, Mark Sisson's wife, Carrie, is probably the ultimate in that. I've never, in all the years I've known her, and all of her friends would say the same thing, she rarely ever gets offended. But you know what? She does deep spiritual work, man. She's at Byron Katie workshop. She's doing this. She's fine. She's constantly in that game, and I can see why. Because she's tuned herself into a vibration of, is that really important for me to get offended by? And so most things just roll right off her back. It's really amazing to see because other people around her be like, oh my God. And she's just like, whatever. And it's interesting because she's at peace a lot because of that attitude. I had a judging thing. This is interesting because this does go into judging, being offended. I was in Hawaii years ago with a friend of mine and girlfriend, and we were driving around and stuff. And we had a couple. We had mutual friends who were a couple, and they're obese, and as a result, they're not really into exercise, clearly. And they went to Maui on their honeymoon, and all they did, like a lot of people, is go from their hotel to the restaurant and back. They didn't see any of the sights. They didn't do any of the things I would have done. They didn't go on hikes. They didn't do the drive to Hana. Like, they didn't do all of the amazing things that I would say, you wasted your trip, right? But she was just like so annoyed and like judging this whole thing. And I said to her at the time, I go, hold on a minute. We're driving around here judging how someone else chooses to spend their vacation.
True.
You know, who knows if they even would like or if it would expand their mind. Do I think that they would have a better trip if they did these 5 other things? Yeah, I kind of do. But who cares? That's what they want to do. They want to just sit there and drink and go to then that's their idea of a vacation. But here she was so like, how stupid of them, and they're insane. You know what I mean? And I literally had to say, hey man, we got to get out of this vibe because we're judging how other people are doing their vacation. There's always going to be those people. We see them everywhere. People aren't going to do the same thing. Enjoy the same stuff you want to enjoy. You know, I had something happen to me not too long ago, and this will spark you as a podcaster, and it did to some of my friends. I was initially offended, and then I went, just information. I am very, like, I have certain people I like you and other podcasters, and you know this, if I really like someone, I'll say, hey, I think you might enjoy interviewing this person. Yeah. And, you know, do you want me to introduce them? And of course I do that with other podcasters. And so I had done that with a podcaster, and they said, oh, I'm already interviewing them. Thanks. Yeah. And I said, okay, cool. And then they said, well, when's your episode coming out? And I was like, this Monday. And they wrote me a DM that really took me back. They were like, hey, can you send me the audio of your interview before you release yours so that I can like see what you asked, and it'll help me form my questions? And I was like, so you want to do your own fucking homework? What? Like, what? Like, I was so offended. Like, I would never ask another podcaster, before you release your episode, can you send me the stuff? Yeah. Like, and here's what I think I was more offended by, or I was more upset by, when it came down to it, I was actually more like, about the fact that they were so clueless to have even admitted and said this thing. Sometimes I'm more offended by that than the thing. Like, someone will do a dumb post and I'm more offended by the fact that they were so stupid and didn't know better than I am about what they said. Do you know what I mean? And so that's kind of interesting. But this person, I mean, that was so, like, a couple people were like, what? Like, how weird. Wouldn't that be weird if I called you and was like, hey, Tara, I know you have that episode with Rob Wolf coming out Monday.
Yeah, it'd be weird.
Can you send it to me, though, so that I can see what you said or didn't? That is, by the and also just like, I just lost respect for that person as a podcaster. Like, really?
Yeah.
It's okay. It's one thing to listen. If you want to do intel and listen to all my stuff to get a thing, but it's another to, like, admit it and ask me to send you an audio file to, like, cheat your way into a better interview. And that just shows me they're either kind of competitive-y, or they're just not doing their job, or they're insecure about their podcasting abilities or whatever it is. But at first I was like, how dare you ask me to, and then I didn't say anything, but I was thinking that. And then I thought, no, that's just information. That just tells me a lot about that person.
Right.
That's okay.
Right.
I'm disappointed. I'm a little disappointed. But
Right.
now that informs my decision about them, and mental note to self. Moving forward, I have this information.
Yeah, I think, what kind of came to my mind there is I was like, I wonder why Elle was so triggered by that. And I really think that part of it is that you really want the best for people. Like, you are so good about that. Like, you really want to help other people rise up to another level. And I think what probably really triggered you there is you were like, like, that is not going to help you in your pursuit of greatness. So I think it was that, like, that disappointing moment of like,
like, what a weak ass request. Like, so weak, like, man up or whatever. So, but again, that happened to me. And I had a moment of being like, how dare the nerve. And then I was like, well, hold on a minute. It's it just kind of shows me, like, I think that person's kind of lame for that. They're kind of dumb for that. Okay. And that informs my decision. And, all right. So, and also a little bit of a flattery too. Like, all right, you think I'm such a good podcaster that you want to hear what I had to ask and say before you even did yours? I just thought the request was lame. I don't think any podcaster would want to do that. Like, I'm not going to give you an audio if something hasn't been released yet. So it's like, do your own homework, right? But again, that just informs me about them. And so it went from a minute of being offended to going, that's just information. And now I know. And okay, I want to say this too. Like, when people are highly offended, like, they have their own ideas of how people should respond to them, how people should act to them in certain situations, how people should react. You know what I mean? And if that doesn't happen, then they feel slighted. Do you know what I mean? So it's about an expectation, false expectation thing.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I'm like writing the word should while you're saying this. Cause like that's, for me, I think another thing I've observed in myself is that when I feel offended by somebody, one is I have an expectation on them. And two is I'm making a lot of assumptions. There's just like, and so check yourself. Like, when you're offended by somebody, like, do a little assumption check. Like, how many things am I assuming right now? For me, I went to like a training, and I was struggling with the guy that was teaching the training. I was messaging you about it. I'm like, I'm really struggling. I don't know if I'm going to go back. And you know what? I was making so many assumptions and judgments about this guy that as the training went on, I was like, ooh, humble pie. I was wrong. Like, I was judging him about this. I thought he was like this, and for me, he was reminding me of someone else I knew. And so because he looked like him.
You lumped him into one. Yeah.
And I didn't even have this consciously in my brain. I wasn't aware of it, but he reminded me so much of this other guy that I had a really bad experience with, that, like, subconsciously I was judging him the entire time. Like, oh yeah, I know you. I got your number. I see how you operate. You're doing this and this and this. I'm making all these assumptions. And so then I'm getting offended to the point that I almost didn't go back, and it ended up being like life-changing for me. I messaged you. I'm like, it was actually awesome. You were like, what? And it was because I was caught so much in my judgment and being offended by all this stuff that was actually just happening in my head and wasn't real, because I was having this lack of awareness that I was judging a situation based off previous experience. So I think checking our assumptions, it's like, oh, I know you, we probably, maybe this is dating.
And that's really impressive.
It's like, oh, I know.
That's really impressive of you. So I want to highlight that, because I remember the exchange over text then. And that is where this is the stuff we're talking about, people, the self-examination work. So
Mm-hmm.
Tara is in a minute of being human and having this moment and turned off whatever, but she looked at it
Yep.
closer, she gave it a minute, she gave it a chance, and then she texted me back, and I remember being very shocked, like, wow, okay, damn, you
Yeah.
like I kind of did a 180 on it, because you
Mm-hmm.
were able to see things for what it is or for something better. Not all situations can be. You might have left and that would have been fine too. But
Right.
I like that you got something so out of it. That's what this self work is about, is that
Right.
being able to,
Yeah.
within a few hours of you being up in arms, to being
Yep.
the person who's like, well, hold on a minute. What do I need to look at here? What a shift.
Exactly. Exactly. And it was so profound. It started to affect every other relationship after that. I was like, wow, I'm actually doing this with a lot of people. I'm making a lot of assumptions and judgments. And like, it's kind of my ego of like, oh, I know how that kind of person is. Like, people can even do this with like freaking horoscopes and crap. It's like, ooh, no, like, I don't like, oh, Aries, excuse me, no. Like,
Yeah.
and it's like, actually, I'm going to completely block and judge you because of one other person that I'm now grouping you with because of this one negative experience I have. So that's something. And also previous offenses. So let's say maybe it's your dad or something, and you are just like up in arms because you're like, I know that my dad's never going to respect my opinion and listen to me. And like, you're just coming at it from that place. So I think like sitting back and like maybe just taking this little moment where you're like, I'm not going to react. I'm just going to choose not to react. And I'm just going to like let it flow and marvel. I love the word marvel. Like, I like to marvel at interactions instead of just reacting to them. It's like,
It's
that
a
was so
curiosity.
interesting. Yeah. Be curious about those interactions. Like, go deeper, another level. What's going on in me to be coming at it like that? And what's going on in them? And then that's where we come into this place of compassion first, right? Because it's like, oh, they're human and I'm human. Oh, and then there's growth and connection is the only thing that I've ever found result from being able to look at it from this place of marveling. So
Because being
it's kind of
offended is
little-
a trigger, right? Being offended is one of those kind of triggers. And I also, so let's look at the other side of it. So you can say something non-offensive and someone will be offended by it. So like, what do you do in those moments? And I think, sometimes the way to handle that is just ask them questions. Like, you'd say like, ooh, it looks like what I said didn't land well with you. Just let it, see what happens. Or, it wasn't my intent to offend you. You know what I mean? It's not that you have to apologize, but you can just explain, right? That wasn't my intention. Or I didn't realize that was offensive to you.
Right.
So if I did, I might have refrained from saying it. And then the ultimate is the F you on you don't care about any of it. There's nothing to learn, is just, well, thanks for helping me see your point of view. You know what I mean? Thanks for coming. Still not going to give it any heat. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think being a social media influencer is a really cool practice on all these things, because, every once in a while I'll get kind of mean messages or whatever. And, this one chick was really going at me with Black Lives Matter, and she was pointing out all these faults of what I was doing. I was like, and some of it I was like, okay. I was like, yeah, I can give you that. That's true. Like, and then she comes back with, well, I'm glad you can at least listen, or, you know what I mean? And it's, again, a little, aggressive, but instead of being triggered by that, like, I felt that in me, right? Like,
Sure.
I'm like, okay, girl, like, okay, like, I felt that little moment, but I was like, then it would be like another little insult and another little jab. And that's when it was like, okay, so she's not playing the same game as me here. Like, I'm being open and she just wants to continue to jab. And that's when I just blocked her, because I was
That's
like,
right.
we're now it's becoming an issue of boundaries, and we're not getting anywhere here. Right. And so,
Right, and you're not engaging on the same level that I'm
Yeah.
trying to engage on. You're just still going down the road of beat it down, and keep
right.
going.
Yeah. So it's, it's like, and that's, again, as I reflected back on that, I'm like, okay, it's kind of like noted. That's how some people are. That's how some people are going to be like, and I don't have to take that personally.
I had a couple funny DM. Now, I don't know if you've experienced this, but it doesn't happen all the time, but it happened a couple times, and also with another friend of mine, where some like older dude, some old guy on Instagram DMs you and is like, hey, how about 500 a week to be my sugar baby? Right?
I've
You got one of
a
those?
lot of those lately.
Okay, so here's what I love about that. My fun with being offended there is, how dare you think only $500 a week? Like, I'm not even offended by the request. It's I'm offended that you even think that I would be worth less than, or whatever.
Seriously,
so that's kind of like the joke. Like, that's what I was more offended by. Like, not the proposal of it was like, how dare you? How, $500 a month? Like, for you? Look at you. Are you kidding me? Like, it was just kind of a funny thing. But those things happen on Instagram. You can joke around and take it as a joke or let it go. And you can restrict people and you can do this stuff. I just think it's better to not engage. And we'll talk about this probably next week. But, with what we do, people will get offended if we do something out of line with that. Like I'm paleo. If I were to eat a piece of bread, if I took a bite of bread at a party, I'm sure there'd be 1,500 people up in arms that were like, I thought you were like, they're like, you're not.
They have that expectation. You're their hero a little bit on the health stuff, right? So they've got this high expectation and now you've let them down, right?
Exactly. So there's so many places to be offended. But again, it's like, it's allowing the other person to hurt your feelings. Or basically, if you're allowing someone to offend you, it's like self-imposed mental cruelty.
It is.
It's a choice to be offended. Now, it can happen. We get triggered, you're offended, but then again, there's a choice there. You had the choice at that seminar thing to go, hold on, am I going to stay offended? Or am I going to look at this and try to work my way out of it? Now, it worked out the way that it did. That's great. He also might have truly been that person that you judged him for. And in that case, maybe you would have left. And you still would have had to process it in another way.
Right. But having that little moment with yourself is so valuable of like, hold on a second, let me get out of reactive mode and marvel at this. And I love, I just interviewed Amy Morin, who you connected me with. And she's so amazing. And she talks about this, taking personal responsibility for your emotional reaction to other people. And I love the example she gives of my mother-in-law drives me crazy. Ooh, that is a victim story. I'm like, oh, I love you, because that's so common. It's acceptable to be like that. No, that person drives me crazy. Like that person is super annoying. Your emotional reaction is up to you. That's personal responsibility. And that's what we're saying here is like being offended. That's a choice.
It doesn't mean you have to accept crappy behavior and just go, everyone's, being abusive to you and you just go, I'm going to not be offended, right? There's some distinctions here. But yeah, that one's a good one. Yeah.
My daughter got me on this so bad, Elle, before we close. Like, so she has 3 little brothers. And they drive her crazy, and they're very rambunctious sometimes. And they purposely like to get a rise out of her, right? Like they're like, meh, 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 like making noises and just to get on her nerves, And so of course, she's 14 years old. Sometimes she does a good job. Sometimes she gets mad. And so I'm always like, hey, Kenzie, like the way she's like, they're so annoying. They're so annoying. I'm like, Kenzie, the way you react to them is your choice, right? I'm always telling her that. And she's like, how am I supposed to, So the other day we were driving in the car and they were driving me nuts. They were just being so rambunctious. And I'm sitting there muttering under my breath. I'm like, oh my gosh. Ugh. And she just looks over at me and she's like, Mom, your emotional reaction is up to you. And I was like, in that moment, I was like, that's true. That is true. That's true. And it actually did help me. I was like, that's true. I am being emotionally reactive right now. So anyway, she got me on that. But I like that experience because it's like sometimes it is difficult, especially when these are deeply embedded emotional reactions that you've been doing for a long time. But they are a choice. They are a choice.
They are. And gosh, I was saying some other stuff about this. Oh, yeah. So you also have to ask yourself this question, like, what harm has been done to you? Has there been harm done to you here? You know what I mean? Right? Like, are you harmed? Okay. If not, like, take a breather. And maybe forgiveness would be in order in that scenario too. Also too, if you're a person, I am not a fan of people doing things for shock value. I am not a fan of people trying to poke other people to get a rise out of them.
Yeah.
That's sadistic. I don't like it. It's a passive-aggressive BS game. And so that can be like, are you that person? Because then you're kind of an offender type. Do you know what I mean? You're looking for reasons to poke people and offend them. You know what I mean? So if you're easily offended, are you doing that? Do you know what I mean? Are you the person that's doing that too? And also just looking at ways that you might be doing that and how to stop that. Do you know what I mean? Because that needs to get curtailed. You can't be walking around and that person in the world and not expect it to come right back to you. And by the way, speaking of confident as fuck, you're going to lose the confidence game every time, you take something like this internally because it's just downgrading your vibration, man. It's
totally.
It's affecting your intentions in life. It's affecting your forward mobility.
Yep. I'm challenging all of us, including me. The next time we notice we're about to be offended by something, just have that check. Have that check because it's such an empowering moment when you're like, I'm choosing differently here. And that starts to infiltrate every area of your life. So I'm challenging all of us listening.
That's right.
The next time something starts to get you all emotionally reactive, step back for a second and say, okay, I'm going to take personal responsibility for my reaction here and start to marvel, start to dissect it. What's really going on here? What's my real emotion? Why am I reacting this way? What's the dynamic? What's the solution I can find here? Because that's what I find is like you become more solutions oriented. Like when my boys were driving me crazy in the back seat, I was like, instead of just being annoyed by it, when I got out of that, I was like, oh, like, of course they're being like that because they've been cooped up in the house all day. And like, you know what I did? We have a lake by our house. I dropped them off at the lake and I was like, walk home.
Yeah,
But
walk it off, everybody.
it wasn't a mean move. I was like, guys, I'm not being mean. Like, really, like, you guys just need to get out. You need to get your energy out, and they loved it. They had fun and they came running in the door. So it took me out of victim mode and into actually solutions. So, yeah.
I love it.
That's my challenge to everybody.
I don't know if there's anything to close out here, but again, I just thinking, stop looking for reasons to be offended. And when you are, let's turn it around and get some good stuff out of it if you can.
Yeah, such good awareness, such a good life skill for all of us to develop.
All right, everyone, we'll see you next week.